Hey, John Church.
Hey, Nick Barnett.
Welcome to the Domestic Dad Podcast.
Thanks, man. I'm happy to be here.
Man, this is a very long time coming. I'm gonna do an intro, but dude, you are my lighthouse. When the clouds come in and the rain starts to pour and everything just gets absolutely crappy, you are somebody that I look to kind of show me where to go. And I think that anybody who listens to this podcast is in for a real treat today, because John, you've taught me a lot, and you're an awesome resource for men, for dads. And yeah, man, just to get started, I think today we're going to touch on empathy.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's, if you want to start unpacking some of that stuff, let's get after it.
Yeah. So empathy has been something that's near and dear to my heart for quite a while. So, as you know, I was in ministry full time for many years, and I just saw a need for people to kind of grow in their capacity to empathize with other people. And so started a training and ran that for several years. And then the feedback from that training, that empathy training, was just validating how much people really needed it and how lacking it was. And that just continued to kind of fuel my desire and understanding of the gaps that people have when it comes to being able to empathize well.
Yeah. I mean, I can remember a time in my life where I wanted to give more to my relationships, but I didn't know how. I didn't realize what it was. I was like, there's just all these different opportunities that I was missing. And as I have chosen the path that I've gone down, I've found opportunities to be more empathetic, and it has literally changed the way I live my life.
Yeah. It's a game changer. No doubt about it.
Yeah. So talk to me about how the average dad, how the average husband can benefit from empathy.
Yeah. Maybe I should start with a little bit of exactly what empathy is and what it's not. Let's maybe do some defining up front here. So empathy is really feeling with people, and it's different from sympathy. Sympathy has a lot to do with feeling for people, and when you are empathizing with somebody, you are really connected to them, and it's a sense of feeling what they feel. When you're sympathizing for somebody, there's a little bit of distance in there, and it's almost a little bit of a head thing versus a heart thing. And when you're empathizing with somebody, it's almost like your hearts are connected. When you're sympathizing for somebody, it's almost a cognitive exercise of like, yeah, I know that this is going on and I feel bad for them. But there's not as much connection. So sometimes sympathizing can drive disconnection. Empathizing drives connection. And so when we do that, and we do that well, essentially what we're doing is we've got that heart connection. And when you develop a heart connection with somebody in your communication, man, it just opens everything up. People are more willing to become vulnerable, transparent, open, and ultimately they trust you.
Yeah.
And they know that they're being heard and they're being validated and affirmed and cared for in a different way. And that just takes the relationship to a whole new level. And if you think about it, like how many people in your life really do that for you? There's not a lot. And it's not because we're bad people. We just haven't been taught how to do this, and you don't, in high school or college, you don't go through an empathy course, right? And
Right.
Nobody really sits you down and says, here's how you do it and do it well. And most homes, we don't grow up having that intentionally cultivated. And most people who are good at it just sort of come by it, or it's part of their natural personality, or they've got some gifting in that area and they kind of lean into it a little bit. But for the most part, this is one of those skills that just has to be cultivated intentionally over time, and anybody can do it. anybody can do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think about you bring up an interesting point that we're not taught empathy. Not at all. Not even a little bit. Actually, we're taught quite the opposite of empathy growing up. At least I was, and not taught, but just I learned the opposite of empathy. What do I have to do for me? How do I do, like, what's in it for me? How do I, you know what I mean? You kind of like in, I don't know if I would call it today's day and age, but in just today, like people grow up with a me first mentality, right? And I think that can lead to a lot of brokenness. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when you're trying to figure out how to take care of a family or another person, being your wife or spouse.
Yeah. 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 And to your point, what it drives is it drives a level of selfishness that we're not aware of. It's a blind spot for us. And again, not selfishness from a place of like we're terrible people, but from a biblical framework, we're sinful and we have a sinful nature. And when you give that sinful nature a platform, selfishness, you drill down to the lowest common denominator of that, and it's really selfishness. I want me on the throne. I want the spotlight on me and I, and that we bring that into our communication. And a lot of times we're not even aware that we're doing that,
Right.
and it's often been what we've been role modeled, even in good intentioned environments. And we can maybe later we can get into like how that plays out practically in our communication. But I have found that when people start to learn how to empathize well and how to communicate a little bit differently, they start to realize actually how selfish they are in their communication, and then they learn to change that. And when they change that, I'm telling you, it's a game changer, because you weed that selfishness out of your communication, and all of a sudden uh, people hear you differently, experience you differently, and it changes your relationships.
Yeah. So just a just an example of that, and I'll give you something, and maybe we can roll with this. So I had just a trying day at work, right? And a lot of that stuff is still inside of me when I come home. I walk through the door, and maybe when I come home, my presence is a little bit negative because I'm thinking about myself, and my wife and my kids are upstairs playing, and they're like, "Hey, Dad, welcome home." You know what I mean? And I carry that negativity in, and maybe I close the door hard, and instantly they can feel that. Um, and I'm thinking about myself instead of them. Would that be a good opportunity for me to? Is there a tool that I can use at that point to really, like, help me? Because I think that's a struggle for a lot of guys.
Yeah, 100%. So when a dad walks in the door, he's got 45 seconds to set the mood. Yeah, and the the kids and the wife or the spouse or whoever, they they know. You don't even have to say anything. They can see your facials, they can see your nonverbals, your body posture, all that stuff, and they instantly read that. And before any words come out of your mouth, you set the pace and you set the tone of what it's going to be like. And so we've got a responsibility that when we walk in the door, we've got to have it together as best as we can, and not that we've got to like swallow all of that negativity and pretend like it's not there. But what it does is it puts a responsibility on us to manage our own emotions, and we've got to manage our own emotions in a way that we can get on the right side of it, and we're not dumping those emotions in places they don't belong.
Yeah.
So, like for example, you were asking, is there something I could do? So, if 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 I could have coached you ahead of time, I would have said, "Hey, Nick, sit in your car, sit in your car for an extra 5 minutes, take some deep breaths, and really kind of understand what's going on inside you, what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, where it's coming from, and then spend a few minutes processing and dealing with that before you walk in the door, and kind of build in a little bit of a transition time, and become kind of self-aware about what's going on."
Yeah.
Because when we don't do that, then what we do is we end up walking through the front door feeling that heaviness, that negativity, with and it's kind of a blind spot with a lack of self-awareness. And then the first thing that either our spouse or our kid does that frustrates us, and we dump it all in that moment. And then what we do is make a mountain out of a molehill.
Yeah.
But if you can get ahead of that and you can manage yourself first, then when you walk through the door, you're in a better position to having checked yourself.
Yeah.
And then you can give something different to your family. And so, yeah. Yeah, part of empathizing well, part of the whole process of that is you've got to be able to manage your own emotions. It really starts with that, because our own emotions get in the way of us being able to be what we need to be for other people at times. And if I can't manage myself internally and get a handle on that, then what I'm doing is all of that's showing up in my communication and my behavior, and it's bubbling out in ways that aren't healthy.
Right.
And I don't want that to get in the way of me being able to listen to you and connect with your heart and empathize with you well.
Connecting with your heart. Yeah. That's stifling, right? When you put me first, and like when you let it come out and you say, oh, hey, me first, that really removes the other person's heart from what you're trying, like from the conversation.
Yeah, it does. So, part of empathizing well is focus on the heart and not the circumstance, right? So if you come to me and you tell me about the day that you had at work, I am not going to be so concerned about the nitty gritty of your day at work. I'm more concerned about you as a person, as a friend going through that experience. So I can put my gaze on your heart, or I can put my gaze on your circumstance, and that changes how I talk to you. If I put it on your circumstance, I'm probably going to go like this, like, what happened? What happened at work?
Yeah.
How'd you deal with that? How'd you respond to that? Who said that to you? Or I might go into fix it mode. Well,
Oh,
are you gonna talk to that person about that? Are you gonna go to management? Are you gonna talk to HR? Like, that sounds like I mean, if I focus on your circumstances, all kinds of different things are going to happen with me. I'm going to get curious about them. I'm going to start asking questions. And what have I done? I've missed your heart.
yeah.
And your heart in it is, that's not what you need from me. What you need is, you need somebody to listen. You need somebody to care for you. You need somebody to empathize and just give you a safe place to crash land and just unpack and say what you need to say without any judgment, without any fixing, without any lecturing, without any coaching. Now, there's a place for some of that stuff. There might be later on down the line in the conversation, because we're friends. If there's some truth in there, some hard truth that maybe you need to hear, or something like that, that might be delivered later down the line. But I would never do that without paving the way with empathy first, because for a couple of reasons. One, I would miss your heart if I tried to do that ahead of time. And then secondly, if I jump in too soon and try to say something or ask a question or offer advice or some truth, if I do that too soon, I might be speaking to the wrong issue.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you start telling me early on in the conversation might be very different than where we end up 10 or 15 minutes later. And in the beginning, the issue may not be the issue. And 10 minutes later, I may realize, we're kind of having a completely different conversation now. It started with some things about your workplace that you were frustrated with.
Yeah.
But 15 minutes later, now we're talking about an insecurity that you have.
Yeah.
And you were willing to tell me that because all I did was empathize with you and you felt safe. And now maybe if I deliver some truth to you, it's gonna be different, because we're talking about something different. And so we can really miss the opportunity to give people what they actually need, because we're just not patient. We're not patient.
Yeah. An example of that. So as you were saying that, there's I had a flood of things that came to my mind that I would just raise my hand and say guilty about, because when somebody just for instance, my wife would say something to me about, this happened or this happened at work. And I go to advice husband or advice dad to that real quick. Well, here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to do. And it's like, with empathy, you can just listen and be like, oh my gosh, tell me more about that. Right. Like is that the right thing to do? Or
Oh, I 1,000% times 1,000. In in the many, many hours I've sat with couples, whether in counseling or ministry or wherever, that is the number one thing that guys tend to get wrong is they do. They're whether it's with their spouse or their kids, they lecture or they give advice or they try to fix it. And that's where they go right away. And I'm telling you, if you choose a different path right out of the gate, you will get different results, and
yeah,
your relationships will, the quality of your relationships will skyrocket. And every wife out there wants nothing more than for their husbands to shut up and just listen. I'm
yeah,
telling you. And if they can do that, it changes everything. And because when you jump in as a guy, you jump in and you start giving advice and all of that stuff, and then all of a sudden, that's not what's needed, and
she shuts down.
yeah, it creates tension, it creates conflict, and then you've lost your opportunity to connect with your wife's heart
Mhm.
because you did the wrong things right out of the gate. It's like she came to you and she was holding her heart out and handing it to you, and you fumbled it.
Yeah.
And then she's like, "Give me that back. I can't trust you with that."
Oof.
Yeah, and that's not what we want. We want our wives to be able to come to us and go, "Hey, here's my heart, and I want to hand it to you because I know you're going to handle it well, and I just need you to be with me in this moment." And yeah, and so yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so I have a question. And I'm just looking for an example here. Like, give me a tool out of the tool belt, right? Like, give me a go-to when my wife or my child does that for me, and they say, because you don't get that out of your kids most of the time, right? You don't say, "Hey, Dad, They don't. Well, maybe you do. Maybe your kids come to you and say, "Hey, Dad, I'm struggling with that." But that comes with a lot of trust. Like, you have to have not been the advice dad quite a bit in order for them to give that to you. But when that happens, when you get that unique opportunity to sit back and listen and not be the advice dad or the advice husband, what do you say? What do you do? Like, what's a good thing to pull out of the old tool belt and say, "Okay, I learned this, and this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to see how it works."
Yeah, yeah. So I'll give you an example, and hopefully it'll tease out some practical stuff. So one of my kids, when they were in college, really struggling with some classes, overwhelmed, just like college students are. And I went down to her room, and she was sitting in her bed, just overwhelmed. So I sat on the floor, and just said, "Just tell me about it." And she started talking, and all I did was listen. And every now and then I would throw out an empathetic statement like, "Yeah, that sounds overwhelming. Yeah, can't imagine how complicated that is. I'm really sorry this is so hard for you." Just statements like that. That's all I did. I stayed out of what is it do I want to say? What should I be saying right now? What's the piece of advice? Because I had all kinds of advice I could give, but that's not what she needed. What she needed was a safe place to say this stuff and get it out in the open. And I just listened. And that probably went on for like 30 minutes. And towards the end of it, she looked at me and she was like, "What should I do? Do you have any advice?" And I said, "Yeah, I think there are a few things in my head that I could say. Do you want to hear them?" She's like, "Yeah, I do." And then I said those.
Yeah.
I said a few things. Well, here's one thing that I think you could think about, or here's an idea. Now, how much better was that, right? I could
One
have,
million percent better.
yeah, I could have gone in and been like, I could have gone into that advice immediately, but it would have shut her down, and it would. So, practically speaking, we've got to listen. We've got to shut up and we've got to listen. We've got to slow the process down. We've got to look for opportunities, and one person calls them an entry gate,
Okay.
and so the idea of an entry gate is when you and I are talking, there's just different openings that show up for me to kind of move through that opening with an empathetic statement.
Okay.
So I'm looking for entry gates, and she gave me those. And when she gave me an entry gate, I used an empathetic statement. That sounds hard. That sounds difficult. Sorry you're going through that. And every time you move through an entry gate like that with an empathetic statement, people will give you more. They'll say more. They'll talk more. They always do. That's just how it goes.
It does, even with strangers.
Oh man. I sometimes I have to shut it down because I'm like, I've got somewhere to be or something like that. And like, I've been doing this so long, it like comes out naturally.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't even realize I'm doing it. And then I got to catch myself and go like, stop empathizing. Cause
Yeah.
this conversation is going to keep going and you got to get somewhere. Like, shut it down, man.
Dude, that happened to me a while back. I was talking to somebody and I had just met them, and they all of a sudden like they started unloading like this, this happened to me. And I was like, oh man, that has to be so hard. And the conversation, like typically it would be like, you would say something totally different, but because I've had a little empathy training, I started doing that and I've been practicing it. And all of a sudden, like all of these, to your point, entry gates were crossed through, and this person was like, felt more comfortable to open up and talk to me. And to be completely honest with you, it made me feel useful.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm going to put the right word on it. And in order to, as a father, to be more useful as a father, that's a superpower, man.
Yeah.
So
That's a good word. Superpower. Do you know what the number one complaint kids have is of their parents?
no, but I'm sure you're going to tell me.
Yeah. They don't listen. They don't listen. And, as a parent, we could look at that and go like, well, you're just kids. I mean, what do you know? You think you know everything and you don't know anything. And one day you'll find out, right? We could have that attitude, but there's some truth to what they're saying.
Yeah.
Historically, teenagers don't feel like their parents listen.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of truth to it. And so when you slow the process down, you actually start listening. It changes. And I'm telling you, I've got 4 adult kids in their 20s. I've lived this. I have seen the power of this kind of communication with your kids. I've seen it from growing up to the transition of them into adulthood, and then trying to cultivate that friendship with them as adults, and how it continues to produce fruit in our relationship. They, as adults, they will reach out to me and they'll call me, and we'll have deep conversations, and they, they still want to know what I think and what I feel, and sometimes they just call because they know that they're going to get listened to.
Yeah.
So like it's transformational. It really is. It changes everything. So and it's accessible, man. That's the thing. It's so accessible to be able to do this. I don't care what your personality is. I don't care how strong-willed you are or dominant of a personality type you have. It doesn't matter. Anybody can learn how to do this. And in fact, I would even say those guys out there that are more of your alpha dog types and
Yeah.
that, that just dominant, if they can learn how to do this, those are some of the most powerful people I know, because not only are they hard chargers and not only are they like powerful leaders, but when they get good at empathy, people will trust them and people will follow them anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's that's when you're looking at like the whole like disc personality spectrum and things of that nature. Yeah. When an ID or a D
Yeah.
can, so I'm getting way into the weeds and people are gonna be like, dude, what are you talking about? But when that happens, I mean, yeah, you're right. That can become very, very powerful, because you do have, as somebody who is comfortable leading, once you can then say, tell me more, like, you know what I mean? Open that gate and have people come through it. Then you can, yeah, that's really strong.
Yeah. You cannot have a strong, healthy relationship that does not have a sense of safety and security in it. you're just never going to have it. If safety and security in a relationship doesn't exist, it'll never grow deep. And and you get there just through being able to trust one another. And one of the most powerful ways to establish that in a relationship is empathy.
Yeah.
It just is.
Yeah. Somebody once told me, they said, "Hey, Nick, the next time that you're faced with a situation where somebody starts unloading some stuff on you, ask the question, do you want me to listen or do you want my advice?" And I think that's not even as powerful as what you're talking about, right? Just doing it naturally instead of having to ask the question. Because so many times, John, I've gotten into into a situation where I am triggered. Like, I don't know what if the right, yeah, I think the word's triggered to just tell you what to do. Tell you what to do constantly. Like with my kids, especially. Like, here's what you do. You wake up, you brush your teeth, you comb your hair, you eat, in whatever order, but this is what you do. And whenever you don't do that, I'm harping on you to do that. I don't know how empathy plays into that, but like letting them be who they're going to be, I think has a place there.
Yeah. I think there's and what you're saying, there's a couple things. There's a difference between just some of the normal ways we got to parent. Like there are times where kids just need to do what we're saying, and that's just kind of how it is because we're the parent, they're the kid. Um, but there are times that we rob ourselves and our kids of experiences that can deepen the relationship. And then what we end up doing is power struggling with our kids over stupid stuff. I'll give you an example. So, um, one of my sons, when he was in elementary school, I think maybe it was third grade, fourth grade, we had trouble getting him out of bed in the morning. And he's one of those very dominant alpha male types. We of course, as third grade, I didn't realize that, but as an adult, I know how he's wired now, right? And so he's always been a strong-willed kid. Getting him out of bed was very difficult in the morning, and every morning it felt like a power struggle. So one morning I told my wife, just let's try something different. Let me handle this. So she got everybody else ready, got him out to the van, took him to school. I stayed behind. He was still in bed. So while he was in bed, I called the school and I said, "Hey, so and so is not getting out of bed. We're having a problem with him. It's been multiple mornings in a row. I'm going to be bringing him in late. I just want you to know why I'm bringing him in late. And before I take him to his class, I want to pit stop in the office, and I'd love for the principal to be able to have a talk with him." And they're like, "Got it. Natural consequences. We'll be ready."
Yeah.
So he gets up and he just sort of lollygags around and gets ready. And he gets his backpack on and he goes out to the garage to get in the van that isn't there because it's already left.
Mm-hmm.
And then he comes back in the house and he drops on the floor and he just cries, "I'm too late." So what do? Do I lecture him? Do I tell him how if he'd have gotten out of bed, and on time and all that? No, I empathize with him. I'm like, "Yeah, buddy, it's really hard. It's really hard when you get up late because then you miss the van." And he just keeps crying. So I'm like, "But you know what? I got you. I'm going to take you to school. And before I take you to class, we'll stop in and talk to the principal a little bit." I didn't have to get angry. I didn't have to get elevated. I didn't have to do any of that.
Wow.
I just facilitated an experience where he could learn through natural consequences and I could maintain my temper. And so it was during the winter time, and we walk out to the car. He's so mad. He's throwing snowballs at my back on the way out to the car. He's so mad.
No.
So we get in the car and I just sympathize with him on the drive to school. "Yeah, it's tough, buddy. I know. It's difficult. Being a kid's hard sometimes." Get to school. I deliver him to the principal. She drops the hammer on him, not me. He comes out of the principal's office crying. I grab his hand. I'm like, "Yeah, buddy, it's tough when you don't follow the rules. It's hard. I get it." Yep. And I take him to his classroom, dump him off, and tell him I love him. Never had another problem with him getting out of bed.
Holy
I
smokes.
didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to lose my temper. None of that. And I just stayed on the side of empathy. empathy, and I just let natural consequences play out. I tried to never power struggle with my kids. If we're heading out the door and they don't want to put on their coat and it's 35 degrees outside, okay, that's on you. I'm not gonna stand at the door, power struggle with you, and get in a fight on the way out. And then the whole van ride, as the dad, I upend the entire vibe.
Correct.
And ruin the whole day for everybody. I'm like, so when you're in the van and you're shivering, my kid's
Should have put that coat on.
Yeah, my kid's not gonna die, right? I mean, it's gonna take us 5 minutes to get where we're going. They're gonna go inside a warm building. They're gonna be fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're gonna have a cold 5-minute ride, and I can go like, yeah, it is cold when you're not wearing a coat. Yeah, you're right. That's tough. And so that's an example of how empathy. I mean, sometimes we just enter into these power struggles with our kids and we lose and they lose. And then we lose this opportunity to just create a connection, because even when you're doing that, even when you're providing that kind of natural consequence and that kind of empathetic experience and that kind of a teachable moment, you are creating a connection with your kid, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah.
Because they're going through a moment of suffering with you as you're empathizing with them, and it just hits different.
Man, I feel like that's a cheat code. Like that is like, that's going to save me. Shame on me for not knowing more of this as I've progressed through 3 children at this point. You know what I mean? Like, but that's like, so my 4-year-old's very dominant, and I can totally see like how that will work a lot better with him. Like just be empathetic and like, okay. But you're not the one who drops the hammer, and that saves a ton of like frustration. That's going to save a ton of frustration. Wow.
Yeah. We take on the problem, right? I'm looking at my kids. Your problem is my problem. And there's a thread of that that's true. Like if you're late and you're causing me to run late, then that's my problem too. But you can flip that script in your head a little bit and go like, hey, this is not my problem. This is yours. And I'm going to be a facilitator of you learning how to manage your problems.
Yeah.
And if we can think that way a little bit more, then we're in a better position, one, to manage our own emotions, and two, create an experience in which the kid can learn. But too often we get frustrated and we take ownership of the problem.
Yep.
And our frustration leads us down a path of losing our temper or saying things that we regret or managing it in a way that's not helpful, and definitely not one of empathy.
Yeah.
And so we create disconnection rather than connection. And so I was very big, as I was raising my kids, I was very big on, I want you to figure out how to handle this and manage this. And I will do anything and everything I can to help facilitate an experience for you to do that. And in the process, I'll be pretty empathetic.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wow.
My kids will tell stories as adults, when they're home and things like that. And they just reminisce a lot on their childhood, and they have fun. They have very fond memories of their childhood, and they share stories. And one of the things I did that gets talked about is sibling rivalry. Every home I know has it. There's not a perfect home out there that doesn't. So if you're listening to this and you're like feeling like, what's wrong with our family? Our kids fight all the time. You're normal.
Yeah.
It's normal. And that was the case in my house too. And so what I would do is I would we had these stairs, 14 stairs led up to the second level. I would put my kids on the stairs and say, okay, you need to sit here and I want you to figure this out. I want you to do a repair. And a repair was figure out how to fix it with the other person. Because one of the things I tried to do is not do as many consequences, like take things away. Like, okay, you hit your brother, now I'm going to take away your toys. Well, wait a minute. That has nothing to do. One has nothing to do with the other. If you hit your brother, I want you to repair it with your brother. I want you to learn the value of what it means to fix it with the person that you hurt. And I want you to learn how to do that. So I put them on the stairs.
Oh.
And the one that the one that did the hurting, I'd put them at the bottom, and the one that sort of received, kind of the victim, I'd put them at the top. And I would say, okay, I want you guys to sit here and I want you to talk about how you're going to repair this with one another and fix this. How are you going to clean this mess up? Yeah.
Cleaning up the mess.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they would have to talk it over, and then they would holler for me, and I would come back and I'd be like, yeah, what do you got? Well, I'm going to do his chore tomorrow. I'm like, okay, great. Are you both in agreement with that? Does that feel like that repairs it for you? Yeah. Okay. You guys are good. And then they're good to go. I didn't have to take away anything. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to get angry at one of the kids for what they did. And I've seen that kind of parenting pay off in adulthood, because what my kids do now is they will go to one another when they have a problem with each other. And oftentimes I don't even know about it. They have learned the ability to, if I have a problem with you, I'm going to talk to you about it. And we're going to fix this one-on-one. And I tell you all of that because a lot of those experiences, I could stay on the side of empathy. I could be a very empathetic parent in the process of facilitating my kids to have the experiences they need to have that's helpful for them. And I could stay out of anger.
Yeah.
Now, I wasn't a perfect dad. You need to know that.
Because I'm sitting here like, dude, what did you ever do wrong?
Oh, no. I think one of the most one of the best memories my kids have is I lost it one day. I don't even remember all the things that led up to it. It was one of those days where everything went just haywire. And my kids were all in the living room, and I just lost it. And I yelled at the top of my lungs, "This is unacceptable," with a capital A. And unacceptable with a capital A, right?
I was like,
yeah. No, and my kids started laughing. My kids caught it right away. Like, Dad, unacceptable starts with a U.
Yeah.
And it just broke it. It broke the tension. But yeah, no, I don't want to paint a picture that we did everything absolutely right all the time. There was yelling in our house. There were times that I didn't choose empathy.
Yeah.
But here's what I did. If I had moments when I didn't choose empathy, I would go back and make a repair with the kid. And I would take ownership of that. And I would take ownership of what I did that wasn't right. And I would apologize and I would ask for forgiveness. Like, hey, what I said to you or in the way that I said it wasn't right.
And that is something that I've done often on account of, I've done a lot of blowing up in my, I don't know, what was it, 39 years before I got sober. I mean, there was a lot of compounding issues that spilled over that created messes all over the place. So I had to go back and do the cleanup quite often, actually. And that was, I don't know, after so much of it, it's like, oh man, you really got to figure out how to do this. And I think empathy is like the best superpower that you can learn to not repair, but like deal with it in the moment and do it the right way.
Yeah. It just creates that safety.
Yeah.
Safety and security. It's making each other's hearts the target. There's a spotlight that hangs in the middle of every conversation, even right now. And you have to ask yourself, where's that spotlight? Is that spotlight on me or is it on the other person? And a lot of times we will pull that spotlight and we'll put it on us, and we will for different reasons, because I want to tell you about my own experience, or because I can't manage my own emotion and that's got control of me right now, or because I don't know what to say, so then I end up saying something stupid, or there's lots of reasons we pull that spotlight over. But we're at our best when we can keep the spotlight on the other person. And that's a way of making their heart the target and trying to stay out of that selfishness, because that selfishness is a blind spot and it'll cause us to pull that spotlight over. Not even from a place of being, self-focused or it's even not about being a drama queen of any type or anything like that. It's just like, I think we unknowingly pull that spotlight over.
Well, would kind of like trying to preach from example or preach from experience come into play in those situations? Like I'm trying to tell you something, or you're trying to tell me about a problem, and then I take over because of an experience that I've had at some point in time.
Yeah.
Is that kind of where, like,
Yeah, that's exactly it. So if I tell you something difficult, or if you tell me something difficult, and like, for example, the work stuff, you had a really hard day at work and you had a lot of negativity from it, and you tell that to me, and then all of a sudden I go, yeah, you know what, Nick, last week was like that for me. I had a really hard day. I had 2 days in a row and it was just hard to shake. And 5 minutes later, I'm still talking about my heart.
and I'm over here like, "Wait, I didn't finish yet."
Right. And typically what we think is, because I'm sharing my experience with you, we're making a connection. Because if I can share something with you from my own life that kind of matches what you're telling me, somehow that means we're making a connection. But that's a blind spot for us, because it's not. It's driving disconnection. Because if you've ever been on the other side of that, where you told somebody something difficult and then they went on about their own story or their own experience, you're sitting there like, um, what about me? What, like, I don't feel heard. I don't feel listened to. I don't feel connected with. And so that's a big blind spot. So that's how we pull that spotlight over to us unknowingly. I mean, this happens all the time. And people share their own experience way too soon, and they do it immediately.
Yeah.
And it's not that our own experiences don't have a place in the conversation, but maybe later down the line, if it's even relevant. Because every time you drop your own experience into a conversation, it's going to take the conversation a different direction. And what you've done is you just missed an opportunity to connect with the person's heart.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's a big blind spot.
Man, I've done that so much in my life. I just go back, I'm thinking about all the time. And that's been done so much to me as well. And you really do feel it when it happens. When you're on the cusp or verge of like really trying to like unpack how you really feel, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
And then you're listening to a story that is completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And not only with sharing our own experiences, but what I would call morbid curiosity, right? So you're telling me about your difficult day at work,
Yeah.
and I could have all kinds of questions going on in my head, like, well, what happened? Who said this to him? And if I start pelting you with questions out of my own sense of curiosity, every time I ask you a question, it's going to take the conversation a certain direction, and it's going to be away from your heart. And all I'm trying to do is satisfy my own sense of curiosity. And that's selfish. That's part of that selfishness I was talking about. And we do that and we don't even know that we're doing it. But instead, if I could stay away from questions and I could just empathize with you, then I give you the opportunity to unpack and say what you need to say. And it's not that questions are bad, they're not, but they need to come later.
Yeah.
And they need to come later in a way that is relevant to where your heart is, not to satisfy my own sense of curiosity. And if people can do this, here's what you'll find out. If you can hold the questions in your head and not ask them, oftentimes you get many of them answered as you're empathizing. Because as you do that, people tell you more and they tell you more and they tell you more, and they end up answering some of those questions anyway. And you don't even have to ask them. And then they were able to deliver them in the way that they wanted, how they wanted, in the process of feeling very connected to you.
Yeah.
Heard, valued, all that. So,
yeah. And that's when you have the most valuable conversations as well. And when you can really grow close to someone. How can fathers and husbands balance providing emotional support with maintaining their own well-being and boundaries?
yeah, self-care, is kind of the thing there. So, as you provide emotional support, as you be what you need to be for your spouse and your kids, you've got to be able to take care of yourself, and you've got to be able to understand what's going on inside you at any given point in time. When our own emotions are a blind spot for us, then that's where we get jammed up.
Yeah.
And um, so we've got to get better at that. And when we get better at that, not only, there's a ripple effect, right? When we get better at managing our own emotions and taking care of ourselves, you can't give what you don't have. And so when you start giving that to yourself, then you naturally start giving that to your family. And it puts both you and your family in a better position. So that's that sense of self-care. We all need it. We all need to have healthy people in our life. We all need to have, especially from a faith perspective, our spiritual rhythms, our connectedness to God needs to be in place. When we drift, we're either connected or we're drifting. There's usually no in between when it comes to God, and that's vital. And I've done over the years. I've done a lot of coaching guys to understand their own emotions and what it means, and then even beyond that, how is it connected to your brokenness?
Yeah.
Because all of us have brokenness in one way or another. All of us have insecurities, or we've got wounds that we've acquired through life, and this is a sinful world, right? It's just from a biblical viewpoint, it's broken, and even in a good home, you can still come away with some level of brokenness. And so, the level to which we understand that is helpful, because that stuff can rear its ugly head in the present, and it can definitely show up in how we communicate, how we think about ourselves, how we think about our family, how we think about the world. And if we have insight into that, we can catch it. Then we can understand how it's connected to how we're feeling and how it's driving our emotions. And if we can do that, then we can put ourselves in check, and we can kind of take care of all that. We can kind of clean up the mess inside a little bit,
Yeah.
And then if we could do that, then we're in a better position to not only take care of ourselves, but have more to offer our family. So there's a balance there. There's a balance between the two. And dude, this takes work, and you got to be intentional. That's the thing. Like, none of this is going to happen if you're not intentional, and you got to care enough to want to do the work. Because if you just check out, if you just come home and grab a beer and sit in front of the TV and veg out, you can't do that. You can't do that as a husband. You can't do that as a
Yeah,
dad.
you're on the sidelines. You're not in the game at all. Like, you're
No,
sitting over there like, okay, this is it. Whatever's going to happen in this game is going to happen, and you have disconnected from trying.
no, yeah, 100%. I used to. Here's how I explain it to people when my kids were little. So this is how I thought about it. I would come home, and four little kids, right? Every night's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Supper's crazy, bath time's crazy, bedtime's crazy, all that. And the old school merry-go-rounds on the
Yeah.
playground, where you kind of grab a hold of the handle and you just swing it really hard, and
Yep.
everybody tried to hold on for dear life. That's how it felt to me. Like, when I came home from work, when I walked through the front door, like the house was one of those merry-go-rounds going 100 miles an hour, and I just had to figure out where I was going to jump on and hold on for the rest of the night. Like, there was so much going on, and so busy and chaotic and all that. But I had to prep myself walking into that, because I just had a full day at work, and I don't get to flip the switch off when I go home. That's not a choice when you're a dad or a husband. Like, you're still on. That's what you signed up for. And you got to figure it out, and you got to be intentional. And so I would open the door, and I would jump onto that merry-go-round and hold on and do the best I could that night to be what I needed to be for the family. And that's just how it is. And when you can be intentional with that, it's going to go better. But if you check out, if you walk through the door and check out, and you sort of justify, like, oh, I've been working all day, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to help with the dishes. I don't have to help with the kids. I don't have to help bath time. No. You can't do that. You just can't do that. It's going to go bad on you. It's not only going to go bad on you for you personally over time, but it's going to go bad for your family, and you are really going to sabotage an ability to cultivate the kind of relationship with your kids that you could have. And so then when you get into it, your kids become adults and they don't want a lot to do with you, or they don't call you, or they don't want to. We reap what we sow.
Yeah. Yeah. Because at that point, you've allowed for no entry gates. You've allowed for no empathy. You've allowed for to not be able to develop a relationship. You are merely a figurehead in your family, opposed to a confidant or a coach, or and you've allowed the rest of the world to go ahead and do your work for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, you just missed it.
Yeah. 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 At the end of the day, what matters most is our relationship with God and our relationship with others. I don't care what kind of car you drive. I don't care what kind of money you make. I don't care what kind of house you live in. And one day you're not either. Nobody's gonna care about that. But what they're gonna care about is the relationships they have. And the value of the relationships you have later in life has everything to do with how you cultivate those earlier in life. And empathy is one of those it's a superpower. It's one of the more powerful tools you can have in your toolbox. And if you're not good at it, get better.
Yeah, do the work.
There's no excuse. Get better. There's so many resources available. So many resources.
Yeah. So what? Speaking of resources, let's talk about that. How do we get better at empathy outside of the things that we've discussed so far? What would be your go-to move to get better at empathy? Put yourself in a situation with somebody. How can you empathize?
Yeah, there's some practical steps I'll give you. Before I give you those, I would say if you truly feel lost, then there's got to be somebody in your life that does this well, right? Everybody listening to this probably knows somebody in their life that does it well. Find out how they do what they do, and start look for a mentor. Ask somebody, tell somebody you want to get better at this, and start working on it. So, practically speaking, you gotta slow the process down, stop talking, and listen. And when you go to listen well, stop thinking about what you want to say in your head. Don't worry about trying to fix it. Don't worry about giving any advice, and don't go into lecture mode. Just shut up and listen. Number one. Number two, look for those openings, those entry gates when people are talking to you. And you'll get better at this. If you try, you'll get better at this. And again, the entry gate is anything that somebody says or does that looks like an opening for you to say something. Right? So
Yep.
you see somebody that looks a little downcast, or maybe one of your kids isn't as cheerful as they usually are. Maybe your wife seems a little distant than she usually is. All of these are entry gates.
And I know exactly what all of those look like too. Any guy, any dad, any father, any husband knows exactly what those things look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. All of those are entry gates. And so when you see something like that, use an empathetic statement to go through that entry gate. And here's the thing with the empathetic statements and even empathetic questions. I know I've kind of talked about questions coming later down the line, but there are even empathetic questions you can use to kind of get things going that are helpful too. So like, hey, you seem a little sad. What's going on? Or seems like you're having a tough day. Tell me about it. Things like this. And those are just things like that's me and how I say it and things like that. And usually when people hear it from me, it doesn't feel manufactured. It doesn't feel fake. It feels genuine.
It's
Because
organic.
yeah, because it's just how I put it on and how I wear it, and I've cultivated it over time. And
Well, it's who you are.
well, yeah, and thank you. But everybody's got to do that for themselves. Everybody's got to start somewhere, and they've got to get at least 2 or 3 empathetic statements locked and loaded that you can say, that sounds tough. That's disorienting. Can't imagine how hard that is. Find Google it. Google empathetic statements and questions. You're going to find thousands of them.
Yeah.
There's no shortage out there. And get 2 or 3 that you can start playing with, and see where you can start dropping them into conversations with your wife or your kids or your coworkers or neighbors. Just practice and see what happens. I guarantee you, you're going to find that people will start talking to you more, and they'll start telling you more stuff. And then as you start to practice it and you start adding to your vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we need to build an empathetic vocabulary of statements and questions. And as you build that, you'll use that more. And the entry gates will become more and more clear. And over time you'll cultivate that skill. I mean, it's really just a skill you got to get better at. So listen, look for the entry gates, use empathetic statements, and be careful about how you ask questions. Stay away from morbid curiosity. Don't share your own experiences right away, and just be patient. Be patient.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome.
It's, there's a level of this where I think part of the reason, especially as guys, that we don't do this is, one, it feels soft.
Yeah,
Right?
it does.
Yeah. And 2, it doesn't feel productive. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. I'm telling you, you want to be a man, empathize. Real men know how to empathize. They do.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a myth that this kind of stuff and this kind of communication is soft. And I know you know it too. Like, we know a lot of people, a lot of tough guys that have trashed relationships because they don't know how to communicate.
Well, yeah, because the opposite of empathy seems to be narcissism, right? Like, maybe not. I don't.
Well, no, there's a hint of truth to that, because one of the telltale signs of a narcissist is they don't know how to empathize. So yeah, there's truth to that. So for sure.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far down the narcissism path, but if you want to get better at relationships, if you want to do better in your life, figure it out. Figure out how to empathize and go through those steps, because that's truly what domestic dad is all about, is getting rid of the stigma that we're so hard that we don't have to, like, deal with a lot of this stuff. But if you stop yourself and start listening and start empathizing and stop blowing the cork off of it and creating messes everywhere, and actually, like, doing the work inside your relationships, you're going to be a lot better off.
Yeah. The biggest mistake dads make is being angry, right? It's one of the biggest things I see is kids grow up and they remember dad had a temper, or dad was angry, or dad would yell. When you start cultivating the skill of empathy, it's a 1-to-1, man. It naturally helps you reduce your intensity and your temper, because you're replacing one tool for another. Anger doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Mm-mm.
And all it does is it eats away at the sense of safety and security that your kids feel in their own home.
Yep.
And that's not what they need. That's not what you need as a dad either, right? You want to feel good about being a dad, because when we lose our temper and we get angry, then we don't feel good about that.
Never.
No.
Anytime that I've ever blown my cork, I've always gone back, like, 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, I'm always sitting there by myself, like, oh man, I really messed up.
Yeah. We shame ourselves.
Yeah.
What a terrible, we either shame ourselves, or we don't do anything about it. We don't even think about it. And that's even worse, because then it's really a blind spot for us, the damage that we're doing. But if we do think about it, it's usually in terms of shame.
Yeah.
And then what happens is that shame gets buried, and then it just adds to the problem
Mm-hmm.
because we don't know how to manage our own emotions. So we don't know how to deal with that. And then we definitely don't know how it's connected to some of our past crap.
Right.
Right. So then that's like squirting gasoline on it. And it just compounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so the discipline and the skill and the intentionality of changing your communication and empathizing, it just helps to neutralize that stuff. It just does. Put you in a different headspace.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it puts you in a place where you never have to deal with that stuff anymore. You know, like that's like if you can start to empathize and not blow your top, then I don't know, man. There's just been so many times where, and at least for me in my life, where that's happened, and I've like to your point, gone instantly to shame, and then I start to empathize, right? Then I start to say, what was it like for my 8-year-old son to have his dad just go off? You know what I mean? What kind of trauma did I just introduce into his life, right? And what did I teach him then about dealing with the conflict in his life? Because now he can go out and use that same example that I made for him. And that creates this whole snowball effect of shame.
Yeah. 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 So let's speak to that for a minute. So let's just say you're a dad out there and you've done that, right? You've messed up, you've yelled, you've lost your temper, you've hurt your kid verbally, and you're beating yourself up,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the first thing we've got to do is stop shaming ourselves. There's a difference between shame and guilt. Shame is I am something wrong, and guilt is I did something wrong, right?
Okay.
So I could sit in a place and go, what a terrible dad I am, what a horrible person I am, and that's shame. That's not going to help us. That's toxic. And when we sit in shame too long, we want to escape it. And it's never a healthy decision when we want to escape shame. Sometimes that's even where substance abuse comes from, right? So, like, I'm going to go drink.
100%.
Yeah. And then what happens is it alleviates the pain for a moment, but it ultimately causes more shame. But at least it helped for a moment. So then we go back to it. And then we don't really deal with the shame, and then we go back to it and we go back to it, and it creates this dependence on something. At least it helps a little, right? And so that's the enemy, man. He just wants to keep us trapped in shame. But we've got to flip it in our head and go like, no, I'm not a terrible dad. I'm not an awful person. I just made a mistake that I can fix. And I know how to do that. And that just bounces us from shame to guilt. And it's not about who we are as a person. It was more about our behavior in that moment. And then we can go like, okay, I can go repair this with my kid and I can fix this. And when we operate out of a place of guilt, it always drives us towards a healthier choice because we can fix it. We can take care of it. We can clean up the mess, right?
Yeah.
And so when we go to do that, it's important too, because what you don't want to do in making a repair with your kid is you don't want to defend what you did. I'm sorry I yelled at you. If you just hadn't done the thing that you did, I just, it, you know, we can repair out of a place of defensiveness. We're trying to like shore up our position. That's the wrong way to go about it. We just simply have to take ownership for what we did. Hey, bud, what I said and the way I said it to you, and even the whole way I approached that just was not right as your dad. And I'm really sorry that I said that, I did that, and I hurt you. Will you forgive me? When you can repair like that with your kid, it's not soft. You're not giving in. What you're doing is you're establishing a connection with your kid that is vulnerable, transparent, and powerful.
Yeah.
Because your kid goes, "Oh, dad really cares," like, yeah, it's powerful. Yeah, so we got to stay out of shame, get to guilt, go fix it, and repair it in the right way. Stay out of defensiveness. Take
Yeah.
ownership, apologize, and ask for forgiveness.
Amen. Amen. I can speak to I learned that a while back from somebody. you. And I've actually practiced that, and it has advanced my relationship with all of my kids in a way that I can't even measure. So it's awesome. That is a true skill and a true that's a dad skill.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
mean, and at least acknowledging that you have some work to do there is step one. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. Cause I tell you, as our kids grow up and get along and they're, we're not going to agree with them 100% of the time, even when they're kids and even when they're adults. Conflict is going to come, disagreements are going to come. And at the end of the day, you got to decide, do you want to be right? Or do you want a relationship with your kid that lasts?
Yeah.
Do you want to be heard? Do you want your piece of advice to be known in such a way that you don't care about their heart? Like, I mean, we can truly sabotage the relationship because we want to be right or we want to be heard, and you got to balance those things out. Um, it takes it takes intentionality.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it takes taking your eyes off of the circumstances and putting it on the heart. I love you more than I want to be right.
Yeah. That's a powerful statement right there.
Yeah.
That means so much.
Or my way. I love you more than I want to get my way.
Yeah.
Especially as adult kids. Um, I don't agree with everything, but I don't have to get my way all the time either. But I want to love you and I want to love you well in spite of our disagreements. And that's a harder thing to navigate because you've got to really talk yourself off the ledge sometimes
Yeah.
and go like, hey, it's not about my way. It's not
Yeah.
about being right.
Yeah.
It's about staying connected to their heart long term. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. That's a mic drop. I mean, just being, yeah. I don't know. I don't know where to go with it from there, man. That's incredible advice. Not to say that it's advice, but that it is a great lesson.
Yeah, yeah, no, there's a place for advice. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it just all of this stuff is about timing. What's the best way to say something, and what's the right time to say it?
Yep.
And uh, there's even a place for lectures. I mean, honestly, if you want to get down to it, like I've given my kids some lectures. Um, Sometimes it was at the right time, sometimes it's at the wrong time. There's a place for advice. There's a place for tips. There's a place for questions. There's a place for all that stuff. But we just don't always put it in the right order or uh, deliver them for the right reasons. And oftentimes it's very selfishly motivated. So
Yeah. Yeah. I always feel like if I'm doing it, if I'm not, if I gotta keep the reason I'm doing it the right reason, right? As a parent, as you parent, like, are you doing it to help them be better? Are you doing it to do right by God? Are you doing it because it's the right thing to do and not for selfish reasons, not
right.
to get a little bit more quiet time, a breakaway, or to make life easier for you? Are you doing it for the right reasons for them and for God? Then it's right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's so true, and that's a great way to say it. Because sometimes what happens to us as parents is our motives get tainted in the process. So our kid misbehaves, and somewhere in our head, we automatically go, if I don't deal with this and deal with it right now, and I don't drop the hammer, this kid's going to be in prison when they're 20.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like we catastrophize in our heads as parents that we've got to deal with everything right away in the right way, or else terrible things are going to happen. That is so wrong. That is so wrong. I'm telling you, the most powerful way to mitigate future damage is to connect to your kid's heart now through empathy.
Yeah.
But when you do the opposite of that, you might be pushing them to something terrible later. So, yeah, we've got to be careful about the catastrophizing. We don't need to power struggle with our kids all the time, every time they do something, and it doesn't mean it's going to lead to bad things if we choose a different path.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're 100% right. Because catastrophizing things brings chaos into their world. And if they are constantly having to deal with chaos, that creates anxiety, that creates opportunities for just secrecy and all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's so many different layers to catastrophizing things and creating chaos in your child's life that they're constantly moving around like this, like, oh my gosh, it could, like, if I do this, this could happen. No, you got to allow them to be a kid too.
Yeah.
You got to allow them to grow and learn.
Yeah. So, yeah, here's another one that goes along with that. I am more concerned about you learning the lessons you need to learn in the way that's best for you than how this impacts my image as a parent. Right? That's where we get jammed up sometimes too. We catastrophize in our head, and we're also really concerned about what does this look like. Um, you know, when you're in a store and your kid throws a fit, it's every parent's nightmare, and you're really concerned about what other people are thinking and what it looks like and that kind of stuff. It's just a small example, but um, how do you manage that internally in the moment so that you can actually help your kid get the experience they need to in the midst of the chaos, and you don't make it about you looking like a good parent in front of all these people? Like,
Right.
you can, I mean, it's hard to do. I'm not saying this is easy. It's hard to do, and we don't always get it right. But when we can stay on the right side of it, then we can neutralize some of the chaos, and we can really teach our kids some valuable lessons, and connect with them in the process. But we really do get jammed up with our own image.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's
Yeah.
I can say that I don't know about recently struggle with that, but I worry about how other people see me as a parent, as a dad I've got 3 children, and 2 of them are with women who are not my wife. So I am constantly trying to make sure that I'm doing the right thing as a parent in other people's eyes. You know what I mean? As my children's other parents' eyes.
Yeah.
And both of my children have step parents too. So how do they see me? And doing things in the right image, I mean, that's a big deal. You want to do right. You know what I mean? You want other people to say, yeah, he's a good dad. Yeah, he's a good dad. But sometimes you got to put that aside and be a good dad before you try to look like a good dad.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got, it's a constant battle of managing the expectations we have on our kids. Right. And that's every expectation, or every conflict is a result of an expectation that's not met 100% of the time, in 100% of the situations. There's not, I mean, you're expecting that chair to hold you up right now. You're not even thinking
Hopefully.
about it.
It's
Right.
kind of creaking a little bit, but
Yeah. Yeah. But if it doesn't, you're in conflict with the floor. So, like, we've got expectations running all the time. Some of them we're aware of, and some of them we're not. And we definitely have expectations for our kids. Some of them are spoken, some of them are not, some of them are known, some of them are not. But anytime one of our kids or our spouse doesn't meet our expectation, we are in a conflict. And so it really does come back to, self-assessing our expectations, and are they rational? Are they irrational? Are we setting ourselves up, our spouses up, our kids up for failure? There's no way they can meet our expectations, or so there's a degree of that that's in there too, and that definitely feeds into, some of my expectations for my kids have to do with my own image.
yeah.
And if you can do what I want you to do in the way that I want you to do it, how I want you to do it, boy, that really goes well for me.
Yeah,
So
that's a good reflection of me as a parent.
yeah, so you better do it. And if you don't do it, we're in conflict with one another. And if we end up in a conflict, I'm going to be really angry. I mean, all of us have been there. I've been there too. My kids could tell you that I've been there too. But it's not where we want to live, and you got to just remember, it's the patterns that need to be addressed, not the one-offs. We're all broken and fallen and susceptible to, um, worst case scenarios, and losing our tempers and things like that. Like, we all have those moments, but it can't be the pattern. If once in a while you lose your temper, or once in a while you whatever, um, that's kind of normal. I mean,
Yeah.
as long as you're being safe, you're not, you and I are not talking about abusive situations right now. We're just talking about kind of normal everyday parenting kind of stuff. But um, it's the patterns you got to address. And if your pattern is one of being typically being angry or typically setting expectations that nobody can meet, like that's the stuff that's really got to be addressed. And so,
yeah, amen, amen. John, I've talked to you, like I've kind of opened up about like, well, I've talked about anger and how we can get really frustrated really fast as parents, right? And choosing a different path for that. But sometimes that anger, it comes out of nowhere, and maybe there's something else to it, right? So, how would you explain that to someone who doesn't understand where it came from, and how you start communicating with people who are angry?
yeah, yeah. When we start talking about this kind of stuff, there's an analogy I use I think is very helpful. Let me give the analogy to you. Let's just say you and I ran into one another in public somewhere, and you came up behind me and you kind of slapped me on the back and said, "Hey, John, how are you doing?"
Mm-hmm.
And I gave you this big reaction, like you just wounded me. You're probably going to think, "Wow, what's his deal?"
Right.
But then if I show you where you kind of slap me on the shoulder that I have this black and blue bruise, what are you going to think?
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I messed up.
Yeah. I wouldn't have done that if I'd have known that was there, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's how it is. We get those bruises from all kinds of different places in our life, either our family of origin, some of our childhood experiences, or maybe even in adulthood, we pick up a bruise somewhere, and it's a wound that we carry, whether it's a father wound, mother wound, whatever you call it, right?
Yeah.
And those bruises are oftentimes blind spots for us. And then what happens is somebody comes along and they say something or they do something that smacks that bruise. And then what we do is we react, and we react very intensely. And we're reacting from a place that's a blind spot to us. And then sometimes even our reaction in that moment hits somebody else's bruise, and then they react. And all of a sudden you've got this escalation, and you've got this intense moment that happens. And you're like, how did we even get here?
Yeah.
And so, when it comes to dealing with anger, part of the process is trying to understand, do I have a bruise or not? And if I do, how is it getting hit? How's it getting hit by my kids? How's it getting hit by my spouse, my coworkers, relatives, neighbors, anybody? And here's my experience in talking with people. My experience has been that most people have a bruise, and the bruise is some variation of not enough, not smart enough, not good enough, not athletic enough, just not enough. And so then you get our spouse or our kids that don't act right, or our spouse says something that kind of indicates that maybe we're deficient in an area.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden that bruise of not enough gets hit.
Oh.
And then we react. We go 0 to 100, and all of a sudden we're angry. And the issue is not the issue. The issue is that bruise, right? Now, maybe what your spouse is saying is true, but then all this stuff, this bruise, just sort of intensifies it.
Yeah, that pain starts to hurt so much that like you have to yell about it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's a common dynamic that I think we all experience in some way, shape, or form, right? And it really helps to get clarity on that. Um, there's another analogy that I use. It's called the shame bucket, right? And so this kind of feeds into it too. When I talk to guys that are angry, one of the things I know is they've got some stuff in their shame bucket.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And as I talked about before, there's a difference between shame and guilt, right?
Yep.
Shame is I am something wrong. And we've all got this shame bucket. And the things that go into our shame bucket are the things that we've done or have been done to us that feel really shameful. And it goes in there and it goes in there and it fills up and fills up and fills up. And a lot of times we can be walking around with a full shame bucket. And then all of a sudden somebody comes along by something that they say or they do, and it kicks it. and some of that shame spills out of the bucket. And when that shame spills out of the bucket, it shows up as anger in our behavior. And so whether it's a bruise or whether it's a shame bucket getting kicked, like these things trigger an anger response. And, it's helpful to know those dynamics, because then what you can do as a dad, as a husband, is you can start to get clarity on why. Why are you reacting the way you're reacting? And then you can kind of like take a step back and go, okay, is this a bruise thing? Is this a shame thing? And then once you start to see the blind spots, then you can do something about it. I mean, half of this is seeing the blind spots. The other half is, okay, now that I see them, what do I do about it? And in this case, I would say, if you start to see a blind spot, like just talk to somebody. Whether it's a pastor, mentor, counselor, start somewhere.
Yeah.
Talk to somebody, because what's tellable starts to become bearable. And all you got to do is start putting words to it and start sharing what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and take a step of vulnerability and talk to someone.
Admitting that you have a problem with something allows you to solve the problem that you have with something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's a big deal. It's a big deal because we can get angry. We can get angry quick, and we can even justify our anger, and then we can misplace it.
Yeah.
And so, the misplacement of our anger, happens a lot. It's the whole, hard day at the office, come home, kick the dog, right? You know that saying. Yeah.
Poor dog.
Yeah, for sure. And so when we can get clarity on it, then we can deal with it properly. It kind of goes back to a lot of what we've talked about, where you got to manage your own emotion. You got to be able to do that internal work so that you're not displacing it on the people that you love, and wrecking some relationships in that way. So
yeah. I think for men to understand that, it's just it brings things full circle.
Yeah, for sure. And listen, there's probably a lot of guys listening to this that they feel ashamed about some of the things that they've done or said. And I just want them to know that you can do things differently. You can start today and you can make a difference. And when you start to recognize that your anger may be coming from somewhere other than the situation that's in front of you, that is a golden opportunity that God's given you to go like, hey, look a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
Work on something that's a little bit deeper, and it's going to have a massive impact, not only on you, but your relationships. And that's the beginning. That's the beginning of a new thing. And when you start to see that, practically speaking, when you feel that welling up in you as a guy, you feel that temperature starting to rise, put yourself in a timeout, step away, whether it's from your kids, your spouse, and put some distance in there and do it quick, because until you get in a better spot with this, the margin of response time is narrow. Like there's a difference between a response and a reaction. What we want to be able to do is we want to be able to respond to our family, not react.
Yeah.
And until you get a better handle on anger, we tend to just react. So that window of opportunity is very narrow up front. But as soon as it presents itself, take it and put yourself in a timeout, step away, go get a breather.
That's one of the most important things that that I've been able to practice in my own life, is to be quick to put myself in a timeout, right? And that's because if you don't do that, not trying to catastrophize, but it'll blow up and create catastrophe in your life. You have to be able to step back quickly. And know that you're boiling up and saying, oh, okay, step back.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you going to manage your emotions, or your emotions going to manage you?
Yep.
And that's really the thing at play here. You think, just for example, just think of a scale of 1 to 10, right? And let's just pick numbers. Let's just say at a 7, if you're getting frustrated, when it gets to a 7, you're no longer in control of that. It's got control of you, right? Well, what do you do from a 1 to a 6? Most of us don't even think about our emotions as guys. We just sort of like just do what we do. We don't give it much thought. And then all of a sudden we're at a 7, and we notice it then because it's got control of us. But as a guy, can you get better at going like, oh, what am I at a 3? What does it look like at a 4 and a 5? And what can I do at that point so I don't get to a 7? How can I exercise some sense of control over what's happening in me so that it doesn't get the better? And that's very powerful, because then you can go like, okay, all right, I can tell that I'm starting to get frustrated by the situation, so I'm going to do something different. I'm going to redirect or distract, or I'm going to change the environment, change the stimuli. I'm going to do all these kinds of different strategies to really, I'm going to bring some humor into it. I'm going to, you know, I mean, there were times that my kids growing up, I could tell that the situation was going the wrong direction. And I could tell if it continued to go that direction, I was probably not going to do well myself. I was probably going to get frustrated and get mad. So I literally would go like, let's get in the car and go somewhere. And we would go drive to a park, and I'd let them out, they'd play or whatever. And I built in some time for them to decompress, me to decompress.
Oh, what a good move.
Yeah. And, or there was a conflict brewing, and I could tell that it was going to go bad, and I needed to, excuse me. And sometimes I would just spontaneously go, let's go outside, everybody, real quick. And all of a sudden it just infused this like spontaneous urgency. And now we're outside, and I'm like, okay, now what are we going to do? Like, I just quickly got everybody. Okay, well, all right. And then I turn the hose on, and we're spraying everybody, right? Like, I mean, it's just, sometimes it takes on the fly, but I can make those kind of decisions when
fun chaos.
Yeah. Somebody once called it out crazy the crazy.
Out crazy the crazy.
Yeah. So like when things are getting crazy, how can you out crazy them and then just diffuse it? But I can make those kind of decisions when I recognize that I'm a 2, a 3, a 4. I can't make those decisions when I'm a 7 or 8 because I'm so frustrated. I'm so mad. And all I want to do is just bark and yell and get my point across.
Yes.
So we've got to get better at seeing when we're moving up that scale, and then having some things in our head that are locked and loaded, and that we will use, strategies that we will use to diffuse it.
Can I share an example of this?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Oh man. So last week I took my youngest son to his first soccer practice. First soccer practice was like complete chaos. You talk about chaos, it's chaos. Like, you look around and there's kids everywhere. There's parents everywhere. The kids they've got coaching don't know who they're coaching, so they break off into teams. And my youngest is like, in the middle of it, he's like, I want a snack, and he's like, I'm done with soccer practice. And I'm like, being the dad, I'm like, no, dude, we're here. You're going to practice. It's a little chilly outside. It's uncomfortable for all of us over here. And this is me being selfish, but we're all a little uncomfortable here watching you practice. You got to go practice. You got to participate. You got to do these things. So I intervene and I start going out onto the field, and I'm like, here, man, do this. And he just is not having it. So first soccer practice did not go well. He was just like, I don't want to do soccer practice anymore. This week, soccer practice comes up, right? And I'm like, and I told Gabby, I was like, I'm not going to let it drive me nuts this time. I'm not going to lose it. And I didn't lose it. I just became intolerant internally. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, that feeling, that
100%,
that internal intolerance. And it's just like, okay, so he goes out and it's chaos again. They break off into teams, and it's even colder this week. Right. And he's playing soccer, and he's doing a little bit better job because he's used to the environment now. It's not so stimulating for him. But in the middle of it, he's picking the ball up, he's throwing it, and I'm like, I'm not going out there. I'm not going to do it. And then he comes over and he's like, I'm cold and I want to go home. And I was like, instead of saying, no, you get out there and you go play soccer, because that's what we're here for. We're all in this together. You're going to go out there and play soccer. I lifted up my sweatshirt and he like put his head under my sweatshirt and he put his ice cold fingers on me, but my belly was warm because I'm big, and he warms up and I'm just coaching him at that moment. Like, hey buddy, it's all right. We still gotta play soccer. Look at all your friends are out there playing soccer. And I'm more like with him in that moment opposed to telling him what to do. And because my 4-year-old son is a dominant personality, he's like, it has to be his idea if it's going to happen. Right. Like there's no telling him what's going to happen. It's his idea.
Yeah.
But I kind of like deferred to him a little bit. And I was like, we're going to go home eventually, but look at all those kids, pop your head out and look at all those kids out there playing soccer on that field. And he was like, all right, Dad, I'm going to go play soccer. And I was like, all right, sweet, go do it. Yeah. Go Cheney. And he ran out there and we all start cheering for him. And it was his idea and he was able to do it. But instead of getting angry in those moments, I think understanding that like maybe he just needs a minute to breathe. I think that's one of those good examples of not blowing up, being empathetic in the moment, understanding what's going on and not catastrophizing the situation.
Yeah. That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
That is perfect. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
What would have happened if you would have told him, get back out there, suck it up? Right? Yeah, because some people could hear that story and go like, that's soft. Like tell your kid to suck it up and get out there and build some grit. And that's how you teach them. That's how you coach them. Don't coddle them. Don't go that direction because they're not going to be ready for the world. I mean, what do you say to people who have that kind of a perspective?
Give them some grace. One, he's 4. Two, he wasn't in the moment. He wasn't having fun. So give him some grace. I think that's at the end, at the root of it. If you force him to go out there, what are the repercussions of you forcing him out there to go have a bad time? What's going to happen tonight? What's the memory that he's going to have of this situation? What's the feeling he's going to have about it? And then what does the repercussions of the rest of the night look like for you once you get home from that failed attempt to go to soccer practice, yelled at him, screamed at him, told him he was naughty, told him he wasn't enough. And now what happens to him psychologically? Because I've been there before. I've done that, John. I've been the dad that said, no, you're going to get out there and you're going to do it. And it didn't turn out well. And like we talked about a little earlier, I was in that moment where I was ashamed of myself for that.
Yeah.
And it was hard to forgive myself for that because it created a bad time for him. It didn't create a good time. But now he's got this cool memory of him warming up inside my coat, getting warm with Dad and going back out there and having fun.
Yeah. And that's the key. He's got that memory. And I would say, Nick, you did tell him to get back out there, but you just did it differently.
Yeah.
And the way that you did it was with some grace, compassion, and empathy.
Yeah.
But you did tell him in your own way. And it was successful. And he's got the memory.
Yeah.
He's got the positive memory of it. And that's what I think a lot of guys don't get is they feel like this is soft. And we're not building kids with grit and things like that. And that is the furthest thing from the truth.
Yeah.
It's wielding the same weapon, just differently, And so when we can start to wrap our minds around that it actually works and it's helpful and it's productive in the long term, it changes things.
Yeah.
It really does. It changes things.
No, it totally does. It totally does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was fun for him. And he woke up this morning, he said, soccer practice was fun last night. You know what I mean? So again, that memory and not be, just remember, I guess to anybody who's listening, and I'm not trying to stand on a soapbox and tell anybody anything, but just remember being kind to your kids is the best thing that you can do for your kids.
Yeah.
Being kind, and you're not spoiling them. They're not coddled. You're just helping them get to a point that you were going to get them to anyways. You're just helping them get there better.
Yeah. And the conversations you can have afterwards on the back end are very different. So like with your son, you could later in the day or even at bedtime, you can go like, hey, you did it. That was hard for you.
We did.
And you kind of hit a wall and you did it. And we did it together and you made it work. And I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
But if you would have been like, get back out there and suck it up, and then it would have been a horrible experience. The conversation or the interaction on the back end of that would continue to be negative, and it just wouldn't go the same.
Yeah.
And so it just looks different. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, where were we?
No, we're just talking about the anger that dads can have, and how to get on the right side of that, get some clarity,
Yep.
and to be able to intervene earlier in that scale of 1 to 10, so we can implement different strategies, so we can keep ourselves from getting to that 7 or higher. Yeah.
Couple more questions before we close out. And I ask everybody this. What's your favorite part about being a dad?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say that my favorite part has got to be seeing my kids grow up and who they've become, and watching them develop and just learn to be adults and to lean into their strengths, um, and to get to be a part of that process.
Yeah.
To be able to have safe conversations with them along the way, to be trusted by them, to be invited into that process by them, and to be wanted by them.
Yeah.
To be a part of that process, and how that just impacts the relationship, with them being adults now. I get to be their friend. I get to be dad, and I get to be their friend, and I get to be trusted with some of the things going on in their lives. And that is, you can't put a price on that, man.
No.
You can't put a price on that. And that's got to be my favorite. Yeah, it's relationships. At the end of the day, it's relationships. And if you can have healthy relationships with your adult kids, it matters, and and I know you and I probably know people who don't, right?
Yeah.
There's a broken relationship. And when you have a broken relationship with one of your kids in adulthood, it's painful.
It's a missing piece of your heart.
Oh, yeah, 100%. It's painful. Yeah. And so I think the fact that I am experiencing it the way, not that even in my future, fast forward 5 or 10 years, that there won't be some conflict or some trouble or something we've got to navigate. That could happen to me as well. But right now, I'm just really enjoying cultivating that friendship with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The best.
Yeah.
Okay. Last one. What advice would you give a dad who wants to get his life back on track as go to first? Like what would you say? Hey, focus first on this. If you want to get your life back on track, whether you're off track from alcohol addiction, your relationships aren't right, what would be the first thing that you would tell him to focus on?
Can't do it alone. You cannot do it alone, regardless of what it is. Whether you want to get better at empathy, whether you want to get better at managing your anger, whether you want to get on the other side of a substance, whatever it is, you cannot do it alone. Swallow your pride and start inviting some people into your life that can help you. We were not made to be lone rangers in this life. And parenthood, being a dad, whatever it is, we're just not meant to navigate it that way.
Yeah.
We need one another. Somebody once told me it's one beggar showing another beggar where the food is. So swallow your pride, invite some people into your life, start connecting with some people that can help you, and get going. And I would even say, as a dad, wanting to get better at being a dad, you've got to make it your job. Like, are you putting the effort into that you are your occupation? or your hobbies or whatever. Put effort into being a dad. Sometimes it doesn't come naturally, and it takes a lot of intentionality. And if you're not thinking about it and you're not being intentional about it, then you're missing the boat. So you invite people into the process with you and start being intentional about it.
Well, John, the domestic dad who taught me how to be a domestic dad. I appreciate you, man, and hopefully you will. Hopefully you'll come back and spend some more time with us as we get further down the road.
Yeah, always, man.
Yeah.
This has been a blessing.
Yeah.
Thank you for what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Well, you bet. Absolutely. Talk soon.